The space station called Kethver was not a place for the weak or the innocent, and everyone who lived there knew this truth very well. Kethver orbited a dying red star at the edge of space, where no government held power and no law existed except the law of strength. And it was here that traders came to sell things that could not be sold anywhere else, where criminals hid from justice, and where desperate people made desperate choices every single day. Salith Vaughn pulled her worn trader's cloak tighter around her shoulders as she moved through the crowded lower markets of the station, and she tried very hard to look like she belonged among the merchants and smugglers who filled the narrow corridors with their shouting and their haggling. She was not a trader, and she did not belong here at all. Salith was the seventh daughter of the High Matriarch of House Vaughn, one of the most powerful noble families on the planet Velisar, and she was running away from everything she had ever known because she refused to become a political gift to a cruel lord she had never wanted to marry. Her species, the Velisari, looked almost like the humans she had read about in galactic records, but her skin was covered in fine silver fur that caught the light when she moved, and her eyes were large and golden like those of a cat, and her ears were pointed and could turn toward sounds like a hunting animal listening for prey. The Velisari were known throughout the galaxy for their beauty and their deadly skill with plasma-edged weapons. But Salith had left her weapons behind when she fled her homeworld because they would have marked her as nobility. And now she felt naked and vulnerable as she pushed through the crowd. She had been on Kethver for 3 days, and she had almost gathered enough credits to buy passage on a ship, heading toward neutral space where she could find sanctuary. But today her luck had finally run out. "There she is," a rough voice said from somewhere behind her, and Salith felt her blood turn cold in her veins. She did not look back because looking back would only confirm what she already knew, but she walked faster through the market, weaving between stalls selling strange foods and stolen technology and things she did not want to identify. "Princess," another voice called out, and this time it was closer, and Salith abandoned all pretense of calm and started to run. She made it perhaps 50 meters before she turned a corner and found herself in a dead end, a small plaza surrounded by closed shops and dark doorways. And when she spun around, she saw them blocking the only way out. 6 Krethenari mercenaries stood there grinning at her with their gray-scaled faces and their sharp teeth, and each of them carried weapons that hummed with deadly energy. And the one in front was holding a small device that she recognized as a bounty tracker tuned to her genetic signature. "Lord Catharon sends his greetings," the leader said with a mocking bow, and his voice was like rocks grinding together. "He's very eager to see his bride again, and he has paid us very well to bring you back to him." Salith felt her claws extend from her fingertips as fear and anger mixed inside her chest, and she dropped into a fighting stance that her combat tutors had taught her many years ago. But she knew it was hopeless because she was one unarmed female against 6 armed warriors. "I will not go back," she said, and her voice was steady even though her hearts were pounding. "I will die before I let that monster touch me." The mercenaries laughed at her words, and the leader took a step forward with his weapon raised, and Salith prepared herself for the fight that she knew she could not win. Then a voice spoke from the shadows of a doorway to her left, and it was a voice unlike any she had heard before, deep and calm and somehow almost bored. 6 armed men against 1 unarmed woman, the voice said. "That does not seem very fair to me." A figure stepped out of the darkness, and Salith saw that it was a human male, a species she had only read about in reports but had never actually seen in person. He was tall, but not as tall as the Krethenari, and his body was solid with muscle beneath his worn jacket, and his face was marked with old scars that told stories of violence and survival. His hair was dark and cut short, and his eyes were a strange color that she would later learn humans called brown, and those eyes were looking at the mercenaries with an expression that held no fear at all. "This is not your business, human," the mercenary leader growled. "Walk away now, and you get to keep breathing." The human tilted his head to one side like he was thinking about the offer, and then he did something that made absolutely no sense to Salith, or to the mercenaries, or to anyone else who might have been watching. He took off his jacket and set it carefully on the ground beside him. Salith stared at him in confusion because she was waiting for him to pull out a weapon, some kind of gun or blade or energy projector, but his hands remained empty, and he simply rolled his shoulders and stretched his neck from side to side like he was preparing for exercise. "I think I will stay," he said, and then he smiled. And that smile was the most terrifying thing Salith had seen since she arrived on this station. The mercenaries looked at each other with expressions of disbelief, and then they started to laugh. All 6 of them laughing at this foolish human who thought he could fight them with nothing but his bare hands. "Kill him," the leader said, still laughing as he waved 2 of his men forward. "Make it slow so the princess can see what happens to people who interfere." The 2 Krethnari rushed at the human with their weapons raised, and Salith wanted to close her eyes because she did not want to watch this stranger die for her, but she could not look away. What happened next would change her life forever. The human moved, and he moved faster than she thought possible for a species with no natural weapons and no combat augmentations. And he grabbed the first mercenary's weapon arm and twisted it in a direction that arms were not meant to go. The crack of breaking bone echoed through the plaza, followed by a scream of pain. And before the second mercenary could react, the human had already spun around and driven his elbow into the warrior's throat with enough force to send him crashing to the ground. 2 down in less than 3 seconds. The remaining 4 mercenaries stopped laughing. The leader snarled and raised his energy weapon to fire, but the human was already moving, using the body of the first fallen mercenary as a shield as he charged forward. And the energy blast hit the gray-scaled warrior instead of its intended target. Then the human was among them, and Salith watched with her golden eyes wide and her mouth open as he fought in a way she had never seen any creature fight before. He used his fists and his elbows and his knees and even his head, striking and blocking and dodging with a brutal efficiency that seemed almost primitive, but was devastatingly effective. When one mercenary slashed at him with a blade and opened a cut on his arm, the human did not stop or even slow down. He simply grabbed the mercenary's head with both hands and drove his knee into the warrior's face. Blood flew through the air, both the gray blood of the Krethnari and the red blood of the human. But the human kept fighting like his wounds meant nothing to him. Salith had studied combat all her life, and she knew that the Velisari were considered one of the most dangerous warrior species in the galaxy. But what she was watching now was something different. Something older and more savage and more terrifying than anything she had learned in her noble training halls. This human was a predator. The mercenary leader was the last one standing, and his confidence had been replaced by fear as he backed away from the blood-covered human who walked toward him with those empty hands that had just destroyed 5 armed warriors. "What are you?" the leader whispered, and his weapon shook in his trembling grip. The human did not answer with words. He simply kept walking forward until the mercenary panicked and fired. But the human twisted aside at the last moment, and the energy blast scorched the wall behind him. And then he was inside the mercenary's guard, and his hands were around the warrior's throat. The leader struggled and clawed at the human's arms, but those arms were like steel cables wrapped around his neck. And slowly, inevitably, the struggling stopped and the mercenary went limp. The human released the body and let it fall to the ground. And then he stood there in the middle of the plaza, surrounded by 6 defeated enemies, breathing hard and bleeding from half a dozen wounds. And his eyes found Salith's across the distance between them. "Are you hurt?" he asked, and his voice was still calm, still almost bored, like he had not just done the impossible. Salith could not speak. Her throat had closed up and her thoughts were spinning, and her hearts were beating so fast she thought they might burst from her chest. In Velisari culture, there was a concept that went back thousands of years to the time before her people had built cities or developed technology. A concept that described the ultimate predator, the being so dangerous that it needed no weapons because its own body was the most deadly weapon of all. Her ancestors had believed that such beings were touched by the gods of death and war, and that to claim one as a mate was the highest honor a Velisari could achieve. Salith had always thought these were just old stories, myths from a primitive time. But now she was looking at such a being, standing there with blood on his hands and a question in his eyes, and she felt something awaken inside her that she had never felt before. "I am not hurt," she finally managed to say, and her voice came out as barely. Salith spent the next several hours searching for the human called Marcus Cole, and she used every skill she had learned in the political courts of Velisar to track him through the twisted corridors of Kethver Station. She bribed information brokers and questioned merchants, and followed rumors until finally she found herself standing in front of a docking bay in the lower sections of the station, where a battered old freighter sat waiting, like a tired animal resting after a long journey. The ship was not beautiful by any standard. Its hull was covered in patches and repairs, and its paint had faded to a dull gray that spoke of many years and many hard travels. But the name painted on its side in faded letters made Salith smile for reasons she could not explain. The quiet knife. She found Marcus inside the ship, sitting in what appeared to be a small medical bay and stitching, closed one of his wounds with steady hands that showed no sign of pain or discomfort. "You should not be here," he said without looking up from his work, and his voice held no surprise at her presence, like he had known she was coming. "How did you know it was me?" Salith asked as she stepped closer, her golden eyes watching his hands work with fascination. "Your footsteps are different from human footsteps," Marcus replied, and now he did look up at her, and those brown eyes studied her face with an intensity that made her fur stand on end. "Lighter, but with a slight click from your claws on the metal floor. And you smell different too, like some kind of flower mixed with something sharp, like electricity." Salith was amazed that he had noticed such small details, and she filed this information away as more evidence that this human was far more dangerous than his species' reputation suggested. "I have come to offer you a job," she said, and she kept her voice calm and businesslike, even though her hearts were beating fast. "I need to travel across 3 star systems to reach neutral Velisari space, and I need someone to protect me on the journey." Marcus finished his stitching and cut the thread with a small knife before he answered. "You are running from someone powerful, and those mercenaries were not the only ones looking for you. Whoever wants you back will send more hunters, probably better ones, and anyone traveling with you becomes a target." "Yes," Salith admitted, because there was no point in lying to this man who seemed to see everything. "I am running from my betrothed, a lord named Ketharan, who my family promised me to as part of a political alliance. He is cruel, and he is powerful, and he will not stop until he has me." "Then why should I help you?" Marcus asked, and his voice was not unkind, just honest. Salith reached into her cloak and pulled out a small data chip that she placed on the table between them. "Because I can pay you more credits than you have seen in 5 years of hauling cargo. Because this ship needs repairs that I can see just from standing here. And because I think you are the kind of person who does not like seeing bullies win." Marcus stared at the data chip for a long moment, and Salith could see him thinking, weighing the risks against the rewards, calculating his chances of survival if he took this dangerous job. "I have heard about Velisari politics," he finally said. "They say that outsiders who get involved usually end up dead, and that death is often slow and creative." "This is true," Salith agreed. My people have spent thousands of years perfecting the art of destroying our enemies in ways that send messages to everyone who might consider standing against us. But I am not asking you to fight my political battles. I am only asking you to get me safely to a place where I can fight them myself." Marcus stood up and looked around his small ship, and Salith could see something change in his expression, some decision being made behind those scarred features. "We leave in 2 hours," he said. "Get whatever supplies you need and be back before then. If you are late, I leave without you." Salith felt relief flood through her body, but she kept her face calm and simply nodded before turning to leave. At the door, she paused and looked back at him. "Thank you, Marcus Cole." He just grunted and turned away to prepare his ship for departure. The journey through hyperspace took 3 days to reach the first waypoint, and during those days Salith learned more about humans than all the reports she had ever read. She watched Marcus constantly, studying him the way her hunting ancestors had once studied their prey, and everything she observed made her more fascinated with this strange species. She watched him work on his ship with tools that seemed too simple for the complex repairs he performed. And she noticed how his hands were always moving, always busy, like he could not stand to be still for too long. She watched him exercise in the small cargo bay, pushing his body through movements that seemed designed to cause pain, and she asked him why he would hurt himself on purpose. "Humans have to work to stay strong," Marcus explained between heavy breaths as he lifted heavy containers over and over. "We do not have natural weapons like claws or fangs, and our bodies break down if we do not use them. So we train every day to keep ourselves ready for danger." "But you have technology," Salith pointed out. "You could use machines to make yourself stronger, or weapons to make yourself more dangerous. Why do you choose to rely on just your body?" Marcus set down the container and wiped sweat from his face before answering. "Because technology can fail, and weapons can be taken away. But this," he tapped his chest with one fist, "this is always with me. My body is the one weapon that nobody can ever take from me." Salith felt a shiver run down her spine at his words, and she thought about how different this philosophy was from everything she had been taught on Velisur. Her people believed that true power came from position and politics, from the weapons you carried and the warriors you commanded. The idea that power could come from within, from nothing but your own flesh and determination, was strange and almost frightening. "Tell me about your world," she asked one evening as they sat in the small galley, eating a meal that Marcus had prepared from the ship's limited supplies. "Tell me about Earth." Marcus was quiet for a moment, and Salith could see memories moving behind his eyes like clouds across the sky. "Earth is beautiful," he finally said. "We have blue oceans that cover most of the planet, and green forests that go on for thousands of kilometers, and mountains so tall that their peaks are always covered in white ice." "It sounds peaceful," Salith said. Marcus laughed, but there was no happiness in the sound. It was never peaceful. Humans spent most of our history fighting each other, killing each other over land and resources and ideas. We had wars that killed millions of people, and we built weapons that could destroy entire cities in a single moment. "Why?" Salith asked, horrified by this casual description of mass death. "Why would you do such terrible things to your own kind?" "Because that is what humans are," Marcus replied, and his voice was sad now. "We are the species that never stops fighting. When we ran out of enemies on Earth, we reached for the stars looking for new challenges. When we found the galaxy full of other species, we had to learn very quickly that we were not the strongest or the fastest or the smartest, but we could be the most stubborn." He leaned forward and met her eyes with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. "Do you know what a persistence predator is?" Salith shook her head. "Long ago, before we had any technology at all, humans hunted by chasing our prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. We could not run faster than the animals we hunted, but we could run longer. We would chase them for hours, sometimes days, never letting them rest, never giving up, until finally they were too tired to run anymore, and we could kill them with simple spears. He sat back and spread his hands. That is what humans are. We are the species that does not stop. We do not give up. We do not surrender. We do not quit until we are dead. And sometimes not even then. Salith stared at him as the full meaning of his words sank into her mind. She thought about the fight she had witnessed in the market, how Marcus had kept attacking even as he bled, how he had never shown any sign of wanting to stop until every enemy was defeated. "Your species is terrifying," she whispered. Marcus smiled, and for the first time since she had met him, the smile reached his eyes. "We prefer determined." That night, as Salith lay in the small bunk that Marcus had given her, she could not sleep. Her mind kept returning to everything she had learned about this human, and her feelings kept growing stronger, no matter how hard she tried to control them. On Velisur, males were valued for their beauty and their usefulness in political games. They were expected to be decorative and obedient, to support their female partners without ever overshadowing them. Marcus Cole was none of these things. He was scarred and rough and completely uninterested in politics, and he spoke to her like an equal rather than a noble, and he had absolutely no intention of ever being obedient to anyone. And yet Salith could not stop thinking about him, could not stop wanting to be near him, could not stop imagining what it would be like to have such a man at her side. She pressed her hand against her hearts and felt them beating fast, and she knew that she was in trouble, the kind of trouble that no amount of political training had prepared her for, because she was starting to fall in love with a human, and she had no idea what to do about it. The attack came on the 5th day of their journey as the Quiet Knife navigated through a treacherous region of space called the Shattered Passage. This place was a nightmare of swirling gases and broken asteroids and electromagnetic storms that made sensors nearly useless. And it was the perfect hunting ground for pirates and assassins who knew how to hide in the chaos. Salith was sleeping in her bunk when the ship suddenly shook and the lights flickered, and she heard Marcus shouting from the cockpit, "Get up here now." She ran through the narrow corridors of the ship and found Marcus fighting with the controls as warning lights flashed red all around him. Through the cockpit window, she could see a sleek black ship emerging from behind an asteroid, and her blood ran cold when she recognized the design. "Velisari hunters," she breathed. "The Silken Thorns." Marcus did not ask questions. He just kept trying to coax more speed from his damaged engines. "Friends of yours?" "They are elite assassins," Salith explained as fear gripped her chest. "My betrothed must have hired them when his mercenaries failed. They are the best killers my people have ever produced." Another shot from the enemy ship struck their engines, and the Quiet Knife shuddered and began to slow as alarms screamed throughout the vessel. "Engines are dead," Marcus reported, his voice somehow calm despite the danger. "They will be boarding us in minutes." "How many of these assassins should I expect?" "A standard hunting pack is 4 warriors," Salith said, and she hated how her voice trembled. "They will be armed with plasma claws and neural disruptors, and they will have trained together since childhood." "Marcus, they are not like those mercenaries in the market. These are true killers." Marcus stood up from the pilot's seat and turned to face her, and there was that expression again, that terrible calm that she had seen before he fought 6 men with nothing but his hands. "Then I will have to be a true killer too," he said. "Stay in the cockpit and lock the door behind me. Do not open it for anyone except me." "No," Salith said, and she grabbed his arm before he could leave. "I will not hide while you fight my battles. Give me a weapon and let me stand beside you." Marcus looked at her for a long moment, and something in his eyes softened. "Can you shoot?" "Every Velisari noble learns to shoot before they learn to walk." He nodded and reached into a compartment on the wall, pulling out a small energy pistol that he pressed into her hands. "Stay behind me and watch the corridors I am not facing. Shoot anything that is not me." They moved together through the ship toward the airlock where the enemy vessel was now clamping on, and Salith could hear the hiss and groan of metal as the two ships connected. Marcus positioned himself in the narrow corridor that led from the airlock, and Salith understood his strategy immediately. In this tight space, the assassins would not be able to use their numbers against him, and they would have to come at him one at a time. The airlock door exploded inward, and the first Velisari hunter came through in a blur of silver fur and gleaming plasma claws that hummed with deadly energy. She was beautiful in the way that all Velisari were beautiful, but her beauty was sharp and cold. The beauty of a blade meant only for killing. "Princess Salith," the hunter said with a mocking smile, "Lord Ketharan has asked us to bring you back alive. He did not say anything about your pet human, so I'm afraid we will have to put him down." Marcus did not waste time with words. He moved forward to meet the assassin, and the fight began. The hunter was faster than anything Salith had ever seen, her plasma claws slashing through the air in patterns designed to cut a target apart from multiple angles at once. Most opponents would have been dead in the first second. But Marcus was not most opponents. He ducked under the first slash and stepped inside her reach, driving his elbow into her throat before she could react. The hunter stumbled back, choking, and Marcus followed with a brutal kick to her knee that made her leg bend in a way it was not supposed to. She went down screaming, and Marcus finished her with a single strike to the temple that silenced her forever. The second hunter came through the airlock before the first body had even finished falling, and this one was more careful, more controlled. She circled Marcus in the narrow corridor, looking for an opening, and her partner came through behind her to provide support. 2 against 1. But the corridor was too narrow for them to attack together effectively, and Marcus used this to his advantage. He grabbed a loose panel from the wall and threw it at the first hunter, forcing her to dodge. And in that moment of distraction, he charged forward and tackled her into her partner. All 3 of them crashed to the floor in a tangle of limbs, and what followed was the ugliest fight Salith had ever witnessed. There was no elegance here. No beautiful forms or perfect techniques. This was raw violence, close and desperate and brutal. Marcus fought with everything he had, using his fists and elbows and teeth, taking wounds from their plasma claws that opened deep cuts in his flesh, but refusing to stop or slow down. He broke one hunter's arm and used her own claw to stab her partner in the throat. And then he finished the wounded assassin by slamming her head against the metal floor until she stopped moving. 3 down, 1 remaining. But Marcus was hurt badly now. Blood poured from a dozen wounds, and Salith could see that he was moving slower, his breathing ragged and painful. The 4th hunter stepped through the airlock, and she was different from the others. She moved with a patience and control that spoke of many years of experience, and her golden eyes studied Marcus like a predator evaluating wounded prey. "You fight well for a human," she said, and her voice was almost respectful. "My sisters underestimated you, but I will not make the same mistake." She raised her neural disruptor and fired. Marcus tried to dodge, but he was too slow. The beam hit him in the chest and he collapsed, his muscles locking up as electricity coursed through his nervous system. "No!" Salith screamed, and without thinking she raised her pistol and fired. The shot hit the hunter's shoulder and spun her around, and in that moment of confusion, Marcus proved that he was not finished yet. Even with his muscles seizing and his body refusing to obey, he forced himself forward through sheer willpower, crawling across the floor toward the assassin like some kind of unstoppable nightmare. The hunter turned back to finish him, but she was too slow. Marcus grabbed her ankle and pulled her down, and then he was on top of her, his hands finding her throat. She struggled and clawed at his arms, but his grip was like iron, and slowly, inevitably, her struggles grew weaker and then stopped completely. Marcus released her body and collapsed onto his back, breathing in great gasping breaths as blood pooled beneath him on the floor. Salith dropped her pistol and ran to his side, falling to her knees beside him and pressing her hands against the worst of his wounds. "You foolish, stubborn, impossible human," she shouted, and she did not know if she was angry or terrified or amazed. "You could have died. You should have died. Why did you not just give me up?" Marcus opened his eyes and looked at her, and despite everything, he managed a weak smile. "You hired me to get you home," he said, and his voice was barely more than a whisper. "I finished my jobs." Salith felt tears running down her face, and she did not even try to stop them. "That is not a good enough reason. You barely know me. Why would you risk your life for someone you just met?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, and then he raised one bloody hand and touched her cheek with a gentleness that seemed impossible from someone who had just killed 4 elite assassins with his bare hands. "Because I gave you my word," he said, "and because I think you deserve better than being a prize for some lord who sees you as property. Everyone deserves a chance to be free." Something broke open inside Salith's chest at those words. Some wall she had built around her heart to protect herself from ever feeling too much for anyone. She leaned down and pressed her forehead against his, and she did not care that his blood was getting on her fur, or that they were surrounded by bodies where the more hunters might come at any moment. "I am going to save your life," she whispered. "And then you and I are going to have a very serious conversation about your habit of almost dying for strangers." Marcus laughed, and then winced as the movement pulled at his wounds. "I look forward to it." Salith worked through the night, using the ship's limited medical supplies and her own knowledge of Velisari healing techniques to close his wounds and stop his bleeding. It was difficult because human anatomy was different from Velisari anatomy, but she refused to let him die. When she was finally done, and Marcus was sleeping peacefully, Salith sat beside him and watched his chest rise and fall with each breath, and she knew that everything had changed between them. This was no longer just a job, and he was no longer just her protector. He was something more, something she had never expected to find, and she was terrified of how much she needed him to survive. The quiet knife limped through space for 2 more days before they reached the repair station, a small facility hidden inside a hollowed-out asteroid that belonged to an old friend of Marcus from his military days. The friend was a short alien with blue skin and 4 arms named Tekka, and he asked no questions when Marcus arrived with a damaged ship and a Velisari princess by his side. He simply nodded and set to work on the repairs, telling them it would take at least 3 days to get the engines working again. 3 days trapped in close quarters with nowhere to go and nothing to do except wait and heal. Marcus spent the first day sleeping as his body fought to repair itself, and Salith stayed by his side the entire time, watching over him like a guardian spirit and refusing to leave even when Tekka offered her a more comfortable place to rest. On the second day, Marcus woke up hungry and restless, and Salith discovered that humans were very bad at staying still while they recovered from injuries. "You need to rest," she insisted as she watched him try to stand on legs that were still weak from blood loss. "Your body needs time to heal." "I have rested enough," Marcus replied stubbornly. "If I lie in that bed any longer, I'm going to lose my mind." Salith sighed and helped him walk to the small common area of the ship, where they could sit together and look out the window at the asteroid field beyond. It was strangely beautiful, all those floating rocks spinning slowly through the void, catching the light of distant stars. "Tell me about Velisar," Marcus said after a long silence. "Tell me about your home." Salith was surprised by the request, but she found that she wanted to talk, wanted to share parts of herself that she had kept hidden for so long. "Velisar is a world of jungles and oceans," she began. "The cities are built in the trees, connected by bridges and platforms that rise hundreds of meters above the forest floor. When I was a child, I used to love climbing to the highest points I could find and looking out over the canopy, watching the sunset and paint everything in shades of gold and purple. "It sounds beautiful," Marcus said. "It is," Salith agreed. "But beauty can hide terrible things." The noble houses of Velisur have been at war with each other for thousands of years. And that war is fought not with armies, but with politics and poison and assassination. Every smile hides a knife, and every friendship is really just an alliance waiting to be betrayed. She turned to look at Marcus, studying his scarred face in the dim light. In Velisari high society, power belongs to the females. We control the houses and make the alliances and decide the fates of entire planets. Males are considered useful for breeding and decoration, but they are not expected to have opinions or make decisions. "That seems unfair," Marcus observed. Salith laughed bitterly. "It is unfair, but I did not see it that way until recently. I was raised to believe that this was simply the natural order, that males were weaker and needed to be guided and controlled for their own good. I treated the males of my house like pets, like beautiful toys to be admired and put away when I grew bored." She felt shame rise up in her chest, shame for the person she used to be. Then I was promised to Lord Ketharin, and suddenly I understood what it felt like to be treated as property, to have my fate decided by others who did not care about my wishes or my happiness. He spoke to me like I was already his possession, like I had no value except what I could provide to his house. And I realized that this was exactly how I had treated the males of my own family. Marcus was quiet for a moment, and then he asked, "Is that why you ran?" "Because you understood what you had been doing to others." "I ran because I was afraid," Salith admitted. "Ketharin is cruel in ways that go beyond normal Velisari politics. He enjoys causing pain, enjoys breaking things that are beautiful and proud. I have heard stories about what he has done to his previous wives, and I knew that if I married him, he would destroy everything I am." She wiped tears from her eyes with the back of her hand. "But yes, I also ran because I could not be part of that system anymore. I could not spend my life treating others the way Ketharin wanted to treat me." Marcus reached out and took her hand in his, and his grip was warm and strong and comforting. "You are not that person anymore. The person you were is not the person you have to be." Salith looked down at their joined hands, his skin so different from hers, and she marveled at how natural it felt to be touched by him. "Tell me about the war," she said softly. "Tell me about the scars." Marcus's expression darkened, and for a moment Salith thought he would refuse, but then he began to speak in a voice heavy with old pain. "There was a planet called New Horizon, a human colony on the edge of known space. When I was young, it was attacked by a species called the Kreth, and the Earth government sent soldiers to defend it. I was one of those soldiers." He paused and stared out at the asteroid field. "The fighting lasted for 3 years. 3 years of watching friends die beside me, of killing enemies who were just following orders from their own government, of wondering every day if this would be the day I did not come home." "What happened?" Salith asked. "We won," Marcus said flatly. "We pushed the Kreth back and saved the colony, and they called us heroes and gave us medals and told us we should be proud. But I did not feel like a hero. I felt empty, like the war had burned away everything inside me that could feel happiness or peace." He turned to look at her, and his eyes were full of a sorrow so deep it made her hearts ache. "I have killed more people than I can count, Salith. I have done things that wake me up in the middle of the night, things I can never take back. That is why I left the military and started hauling cargo, because I thought if I could just be alone, if I could just stop fighting, maybe I could find some way to live with myself." "And did you?" Salith asked. "Did you find peace?" Marcus shook his head. "No, I found emptiness. I found long days and longer nights and nothing to fill the hole inside me. Until I saw those mercenaries threatening you in that market, and for the first time in years, I felt something other than numb. Sayla's breath caught in her throat. What did you feel? Purpose, Marcus answered. I felt like there was finally something worth fighting for. The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken words, and Sayla felt her heart beating so hard she was sure he must be able to hear them. My people would say I am lowering myself, she said quietly, taking a human as a partner. Your species is considered barely civilized by Velisari standards, and you have no political value at all. Marcus smiled slightly. My people would say I am in over my head, getting involved with alien royalty who has assassins hunting her. Are you? Sayla asked. Involved? He looked at her with those brown eyes that had seen so much pain and death, and yet still held the capacity for gentleness. I think I have been since the cantina. Sayla moved closer to him, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body and smell that strange scent that she had come to associate with safety and strength. I have never been with a human before, she admitted. I do not even know if our species are compatible. Only one way to find out, Marcus replied, and there was a warmth in his voice that made her fur stand on end. Sayla leaned forward and pressed her lips against his, and the kiss was awkward at first, because their mouths were shaped differently, and neither of them knew quite what to do. But then Marcus's hand came up to cup the back of her head, and she melted into him. The kiss deepened, and all the fear and pain and loneliness that both of them had been carrying seemed to fade away, replaced by something new and fragile and precious. When they finally pulled apart, Sayla was trembling, and she could see that Marcus was affected too, his breathing uneven and his eyes bright. That was not terrible, he said with a small smile. Sayla laughed, a genuine laugh that she had not heard from herself in longer than she could remember. For a human, you are adequate. I will take adequate, Marcus replied, and he pulled her into his arms and held her close. And for the first time since she had fled Velisa, Sayla felt like she might actually have a future worth living. They spent the rest of the night talking, sharing stories and secrets and dreams, learning each other in ways that went beyond words. And when they finally fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, neither of them had nightmares for the first time in years. On the third day, Tekka announced that the ship was repaired and ready to fly. But when he looked at the two of them standing together with their hands intertwined, he just smiled knowingly and said nothing. The final leg of their journey awaited, and both of them knew that the greatest challenge was still to come. But whatever happened, they would face it together. The border of neutral Velisari space was marked by a line of navigation beacons that stretched across the void. And beyond those beacons lay safety and freedom and everything Sayla had been running toward. But between the quiet knife and those beacons floated a blockade of 7 warships, their hulls gleaming with the silver and crimson colors of House Ketharan. And at the center of the formation sat a massive flagship that could have destroyed Marcus's little freighter with a single shot. Sayla stared at the display screen and felt her hope crumble into dust. They had come so far and fought so hard, and now her betrothed had found them at the very edge of victory. Lord Ketharan himself has come, she whispered. He never leaves his palace. He must want me very badly to travel this far. Marcus studied the blockade with the calm expression of a soldier calculating odds. Can we go around? No. His ships are faster than ours, and he will have scouts watching every possible approach. If we try to run, he will catch us. The communications panel crackled to life, and a voice filled the cockpit that made Sayla's blood freeze in her veins. Princess Sayla. Lord Ketharan's voice purred through the speakers, smooth and cold and full of barely contained rage. You have led me on quite a chase, my darling. I have lost 4 of my best assassins and spent a fortune in bribes and bounties, all because you could not accept your proper place at my side." Salith forced herself to respond, keeping her voice steady. "I will never be yours, Catharan. I would rather die in the void than let you touch me." "That can be arranged," he replied with a cruel laugh. "But I think I have a better idea. Surrender yourself to me now, and I will let your human pet live. Refuse, and I will destroy his ship with him aboard, and then I will drag you from the wreckage and show you what happens to females who disobey their lords." Marcus's hand found hers and squeezed gently. "How big is this Catharan?" "He is massive," Salith answered. "Merely 3 meters tall and enhanced with combat implants that make him faster and stronger than any natural Velisari. He has never lost a fight in his life. Has he ever fought a human?" Salith turned to look at Marcus with wide eyes. "What are you thinking?" Marcus smiled that terrible smile that she had first seen in the market on Cathfor, and she felt fear and hope war inside her chest. He reached for the communications panel and opened a channel to the entire blockade. "Lord Catharan, this is Marcus Cole of the Quiet Knife. I invoke the right of challenge. Single combat, no weapons. The winner takes Salith Vaughn." Silence filled the space between the ships for a long moment, and then Catharan's voice returned, dripping with disbelief and amusement. "You invoke the right of challenge? A human? You know nothing of our traditions." "I know that the right of challenge is sacred law among your people," Marcus replied. "I know that any warrior can invoke it, regardless of species. And I know that if you refuse, every ship in your blockade will know that Lord Catharan was afraid to fight a single unarmed human." Salith held her breath as she watched the flagship, and she could almost imagine Catharan's face twisting with rage at being manipulated by this clever human. "Very well," the Lord finally answered. "I accept your challenge, human. Dock with my flagship and prepare to die." The channel closed, and Salith grabbed Marcus's arm. "You cannot do this. Catharan is a monster. He has killed dozens of warriors in single combat." "Then it is time someone stopped him," Marcus said, and his voice was gentle but absolutely certain. "I did not bring you this far to watch you be dragged back to that life. This is not your fight." Salith pleaded. "I am not worth dying for." Marcus cupped her face in his hands and looked into her golden eyes. "You are worth everything. You are brave and kind, and you deserve to be free. And I made you a promise that I would get you home, and I intend to keep that promise." "Marcus." He kissed her, soft and sweet and full of things neither of them had words to express. And when he pulled back, his eyes were shining. "Wait for me," he said. "I will come back to you." The docking procedure felt like a march to an execution, and Salith walked beside Marcus with her heart breaking in her chest. Around them, hundreds of Velisari warriors lined the corridors of the flagship, all staring at the human who had dared to challenge their lord. They emerged onto the main deck of the ship, where a fighting circle had been painted on the floor, and there, waiting in the center, stood Lord Catharan himself. He was even more terrifying in person than Salith remembered. His silver fur was streaked with black patterns that marked him as a warrior of the highest caste, and his body was massive with muscles that had been enhanced far beyond natural limits. His golden eyes gleamed with cruel anticipation as he studied Marcus. "So this is the human who has been protecting my bride," Catharan said, his voice echoing through the silent deck. "I expected something more impressive. You are smaller than I thought." Marcus removed his jacket and rolled his shoulders, just as he had done in that market so many days ago. "Size is not everything." Catharan laughed and flexed his clawed hands. "I am going to enjoy tearing you apart, little human. And when I am done, I am going to make Salith watch while I mount your head on my wall." Marcus just smiled. The fight began without warning. Catharan launching himself across the circle with a speed that seemed impossible for someone so large. His clawed hand slashed toward Marcus's throat, and Marcus barely managed to duck beneath the strike. He countered with a punch to Catharan's ribs, but the Lord barely seemed to feel it, and his backhand caught Marcus across the face and sent him staggering. Blood flew from Marcus's split lip, and the watching Velisari cheered for their lord. Catharan pressed his advantage, raining down blows that Marcus could barely block, each impact driving the human back toward the edge of the circle. A kick caught Marcus in the chest and cracked ribs, and he went down hard on one knee. "Is this all you have?" Catharan taunted. "I thought humans were supposed to be great warriors. You are nothing but a weak little animal." Marcus spat blood onto the deck and looked up at the massive lord with something that might have been a smile. "I am just getting started." He rose and attacked again, and this time he did not try to match Catharan's strength. Instead, he moved like water, flowing around the lord's strikes and landing quick blows that targeted joints and pressure points. Catharan roared in frustration as Marcus danced around him, unable to land a solid hit on the smaller, faster human. But the Lord was patient, and eventually Marcus made a mistake, and a brutal uppercut lifted him off his feet and slammed him onto his back. Marcus lay there gasping for breath, blood pouring from his nose and mouth, and Salith had to clamp her hands over her mouth to keep from screaming. "Stay down," Catharan commanded. "Stay down and die with some dignity." Marcus pushed himself up onto his elbows, then his hands, then one knee, then both feet. He stood swaying in front of the massive Velisari lord, with his face a mask of blood and his body broken in a dozen places, and he raised his fists. "No," he said. Catharan struck him down again. And again Marcus rose. The lord broke his arm with a savage twist. Marcus kept fighting with only one hand. He shattered Marcus's collarbone. The human did not stop. Salith watched with tears streaming down her face as the man she loved was destroyed piece by piece. And yet he kept getting up, kept moving forward, kept refusing to surrender. And slowly and possibly, she saw something change in Catharan's eyes. The cruel amusement faded, replaced first by confusion, and then by something that looked almost like fear. "Why will you not stay down?" the Lord demanded, and for the first time his voice held a note of uncertainty. Marcus grinned through bloody teeth. "Because humans do not quit. We are the species that chased mammoths until they collapsed. We are the species that conquered our world with sticks and stones. We do not surrender, we do not give up, we do not stop fighting until we are dead." He lurched forward and headbutted Catharan with all his remaining strength, and the Lord staggered back with his nose shattered and blood pouring down his face. And sometimes, Marcus continued as he followed, his one working hand finding Catharan's throat. Not even then. The Lord tried to pull away, tried to break Marcus's grip, but the human held on with a strength that seemed impossible given his condition. They struggled together in the center of the circle, and Salith could see Catharan's face turning purple as Marcus squeezed. The Lord's struggles grew weaker, then weaker still, and finally his enhanced body went limp and collapsed to the deck. Marcus stood over him, swaying on his feet, barely conscious, but victorious. The watching Velisari were completely silent, staring at this broken human who had done the impossible. And then, one by one, they began to kneel. Salith ran to Marcus and caught him just as his legs gave out. She lowered him gently to the deck and pressed her face against his chest, feeling his heart still beating. "You impossible, stubborn, beautiful fool," she sobbed. "You did it! You actually did it." "Told you," Marcus whispered. "Finish my jobs." Salith laughed through her tears and looked up at the kneeling warriors who surrounded them. She had never expected this, never imagined that she would be standing here victorious with a human at her side. But fate had a strange sense of humor. I claim this human, she announced in a voice that carried across the silent deck. By right of victory. By right of choice. He's mine.